again, another good morning, good afternoon or good evening, wherever you might be calling in from today to this webinar, Mastering Tough Sales Conversations. My name is Jens Churchill. I've been in procurement all my career, nearly 20 years now. And some of you might be saying, Jens, you've spent all your career on the dark side. But to be open and honest with you, I've enjoyed every single minute of it, interacting with suppliers and sales professionals as yourselves. I've changed gear a little bit now. I'm more on the sales side now. I'm training sales teams predominantly on how they can better interact with their customers and how they can build winning relationships. And obviously that's part of the topic here and part of the webinar here today. I would like to help you how to sell to your B2B customers during these difficult times, during these new tariff regimes that we find ourselves under. And that's what we want to be talking here today. Obviously, the backdrop is, as I already mentioned early on, new tariffs have been introduced by the American administration, and you must be feeling the heat right away. So we want to obviously cover this topic and help you on what you can do potentially as supplier and sales manager to manage these conversations that you will be having with your customers around that particular topic. Okay, so I would like to start off the presentation here with some quotes. The first quotes, probably the gentleman on the left, everybody's familiar with. There's no business conversation these days without mentioning his name. Donald Trump, who famously said, well, tariffs, the most beautiful word in the world. I let you be the judge of that, if that is really true or not, depending upon maybe on what political spectrum you are. You might be saying yes or no, but this is not really the topic of today. We don't want to focus on politics. We want to focus on what should we be doing now as business professionals in this situation, and with this new reality that we are confronted with. And I would rather have, bring in the gentleman there on the right, Winston Churchill, that you might know as well, that said, well, never let a good crisis go to waste, and maybe leverage that particular quote to see on what can we do as supplier and sales managers that have to face these, price increase and cost increase, and what we can do to our advantage to maybe build even better relationship with the customers that we're currently interacting with. Just a very small disclaimer. I know that especially the topic that we're talking about here today, or that we're covering, can trigger quite some emotions, independent on where you are in the political spectrum. But I just want to remind everybody, this is really not a political discourse. This is not a conversation around pro or contra tariffs. This is a topic for another time. We really want to focus as business professionals on how we're going to deal with this situation, and in particular with the situation of increased input cost in the supply chain, and in particular to discuss what you can do as suppliers and sales manager in the conversation with your customer with regards to that. So let's have a look into the agenda on what we have prepared for you here today. I will first start and kick it off a little bit with an introduction so that you actually know who you're talking to. And then after that, we will give you just a quick overview on what is going on in the world of tariffs. Obviously, a moving picture. Yes, we had the announcement yesterday by Donald Trump, but I think this will not be the end of it. So we will have a quick just overview on what has happened so far, what were already the implications with regards to the various supply chains around the world. And then we look into more of a buyer's perspective. We want to explore and we want to activate for you what is going through the buyer's mind now with these tariffs becoming into place. What anxieties do they go through? And I want to lift the carpet a little bit with the experience and backdrop, from my career on what is actually going on your customer side. What should you anticipate? What should you expect from these people? And how can you then react in the best way possible? And that brings us to the next agenda point, namely the solution. How should you sell to these customers during a tariff war? How do you address, how do you best manage these conversations where obviously there will be a point where you need to be saying, well, we need to have to pass on some costs to you, customer. How do you manage these conversations, and how do you make sure that you maybe even leverage these conversations to build better relationships with your customers? I would like to close out the webinar here today with a little bit of homework for you, because I want to give you an instruction, let's say, on how you can take the right actions to be successful and take that first step to build that better relationship with your customers, despite the fact that we experience such tough implications from the new tariff regime. And obviously, we will have plenty of time for some Q&A. I roughly expect that I'm going to be presenting to you 30 to 40 minutes, and then the rest of the time will be there for your questions and hopefully my good answers. So before I get going, let me just quickly hand it over to my colleague Ivan Stevanovic, who is the magic hands there in the background, who makes this all happening here with some quick introductory words and also some tips on how you can use Zoom in the best way possible. Over to you, Ivan. Quick introduction just about ourselves and who we are as FIVIS. We are a training and consultancy company based here in London. And you see there on the left-hand side, some of our team that have contributed also to this webinar here today. So really proud to present some of our findings to you today. And, you know, our motto, our mission, and quite frankly, what gets us up in the morning every day to do this here for you is we want to build bridges between procurement and sales. So between the buying side on the customer side and you guys, the suppliers and the sales side, we think that there is tons of value just a way to be unlocked if both sides would be understanding each other a little better. So we spend a lot of time with your customers' organization, with procurement teams in particular, to make them more customer-centric, to allow them to better understand their business needs and allow them to articulate them well to you guys, to the suppliers, to build value and create these strong relationships that are so important. Equally so, we spend a lot of time with suppliers and sales teams, such as yourselves, to help you better understand what's going on your customer side. What makes them tick? What makes them, engage with you? How can you really build these bonds and strong relationships? And we want to help you unleash a customer-centricity mindset that so that you always think with the customer's minds first and not focus only on your product or service that you might be offering. Also, something that maybe sets us apart, and we want to activate this here in our webinar as well. Whenever we give a presentation, a training, or a workshop, you will always see somebody that has physically sat on your customer side. Obviously, I've been for 20 years in procurement. I might have even physically sat opposite you the negotiation table, and leverage that, please, right? I mean, put your questions into the chat that you always wanted to ask the buyers on your customer side. I'm here to deliver not only some content, but also to give you the confidence that you know how to handle and deal with these buyers on the customer side, especially during these difficult times. Alrighty, so let's get going and start with the situation. So what are we currently being faced with regards to tariffs? As I said earlier on, Donald Trump in the lovely Rose Garden at the White House yesterday presented his vision of tariffs, and it was quite a, let's say, surprise on the amount of tariffs that were coming or were imposed. And just to put this into perspective, we're really not talking peanuts here, I'm afraid. To put this into a historical perspective, this chart from Bloomberg Economics is really, really helpful for you to grasp maybe the gravity on what we're talking about here. The tariffs that have been proposed, and obviously we don't have yet 100% the full picture because we don't know yet on how other countries will react to this. But just to put this onto a timeline here, potentially we're being faced with tariffs that we haven't seen for a good more than 100 years. So this is something that is really territory that we haven't seen in many, many generations that we need to be coping with. So this obviously creates a lot of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and you must be feeling it already day in, day out in the conversation that you have internally as within your supplier organizations, but also already with the customers that probably are approaching you or have been approaching you for months already. What are the implications of these tariffs now? And I think here's again another chart that I find very insightful, that if we just look into this index, the uncertainty about trade policy index, that again Bloomberg is tracking on a regular basis, we can see there's a significant spike in that kind of uncertainty index. And I think this is exactly what we're feeling here as business professionals on the buying and on the supply side every day, that we just don't know what is going on, what will be coming next. And I'm afraid to break it to you, probably this will not be the end, right? There will be probably, reactions from other countries, which will then again shift the whole picture of what we need to be dealing with as business professionals. So just to put this into perspective, this is what we currently are seeing with regards to the trade policy that have been announced. Also, that is the last chart that I want to share with you here today. We also have seen real supply chain implications because of that. So this is just an overview of imports, the value of imports coming into the US, and you see that there's a massive spike in January of this year, meaning a lot of organizations, a lot of companies, a lot of businesses have advanced some of their imports into January just to avoid or in anticipation of the tariffs that are now have been put in place. And that had already, had significant knock-on effects, and you will feel continued knock-on effects with regards to that spike, throughout your supply chain potentially. So the bottom line here is there's a financial element to this, and there's a physical element to the supply chains that we've already are experiencing on the supply side and on the customer side. So this is something very important to keep in mind. Now let's take this back to your reality as sales managers. And I want to just use some very simple examples. People that have joined my workshops before, my presentations, I always like to use very simple examples. So please stick with me here for a moment. It will all make sense later on, but I just want to use some examples that are so simple that everybody understands what I'm trying to relay. So your reality might be looking a little bit like this. You're selling some of these products or products that look similar to that, something similar to a pen maybe that is very standardized, or you sell maybe something that is put into these lovely barrels that may be a chemical or commodity, or you might be selling something that is very specific, a very special product that maybe only you can produce. And you're obviously being faced with that these products directly or indirectly are impacted by these tariffs, and now you need to explain to your customer that you might need to increase the prices for your pens, for your barrels of commodities, or your computer chips by a certain percentage point. So this is the uncomfortable situation that we are in, that you are in as supplier and sales managers, that you now need to have these tough conversations with your customers. Let's have a look into your negotiation spectrum as sales. And what is a negotiation spectrum? It's normally on how you would approach a commercial conversation, a commercial negotiation with your customer, and with that potential, with that procurement professional on the other side. And in normal times, outside of the tariff madness that we're experiencing, you probably would approach this negotiation somewhere from the middle part of this negotiation spectrum, right? You would be probably not very adversarial. You wouldn't be like super collaborative, but probably you approach it from a value-focused point of view, depending upon what you sell and who your customer is. So in general, on average, we could say this is probably where you're at as a sales manager when you start negotiating with your counterparts on the customer side. Now, what is changing now in these difficult times for you as sales manager? How do you change this approach on how you negotiate with your customers? Well, one of your pressures that you might be experiencing is that your leadership team, your company leadership team, your sales leadership team, your direct manager instruct you to go to our customers and just tell them that they have to absorb that price increase, because we cannot. And it's not our mistake that there's a new administration in the US. Well, they have to absorb the 18, 15, 25% that has been announced, because we cannot absorb it as supplier organizations. So you're being pushed, right, rightly or wrongly, to be more adversarial that you probably want to be in the interaction and in the conversation with the customers, right? So it's something that makes you feel probably initially uncomfortable, right? I mean, it's not something that we enjoy doing. We generally, as human beings, are always seeking for compromise, being collaborative. This is more something that we enjoy, but this is going to be a tough and adversarial conversation, most likely, that you're going to be having with your customer, because they don't like what you're going to be relaying to them. So I can assure you already, it's going to be a stressful situation, that conversation you'll be having with your customer. And I would like to outline to you just for a moment on what happens when you're confronted with a stressful situation, because there's been a lot of studies on what psychology, from a psychology point of view, is happening when you're faced with a stressful situation. Normally, you will react in the following way. You want to run away from the situation, or you fight the situation. And where do these behaviors come from? So back in the day, when we were still hunters and gatherers, thousands and thousands of years ago, when we had to fight the dinosaurs or the saber-toothed tiger, God knows what it was, we had two options, or two strategies that were very successful. We either were fighting the beast that we encountered in the wilderness, or we did run away from it. And these were really, really successful strategies. That's the reason why we're sitting here today as on the top of the food chain. Now, the problem, though, is that over the millennia, this kind of behavior, this tactic, when we're faced with a stressful situation, is now ingrained in our DNA. And our mind plays a trick on us. It plays a trick on us whenever we're faced with a stressful situation, that we again act or reenact pretty much those behaviors that we've shown over thousands and thousands of years. So we want to run away from that situation, or we want to fight the situation. That does not mean that in these difficult conversations, these stressful conversations that we're going to be having with your customers, that you physically run away or that you physically fight your customer. At least I hope not. but you react in a non-collaborative way. You really tense, you really just focus on yourself. You're not seeing the big picture. You don't want to engage in a collaborative conversation necessarily because you're feeling the stress and you're feeling the pressure. And we want you to, explore a different way of behaviors. And this is normally what we do very much in detail in our workshops to help you explore how can you become customer-centric even when you're being faced with a very, adversarial conversation that you need to be having, or maybe with a negotiation partner that is very adversarial. Now, in this webinar here today, we just want to give you some insights and some ideas and some tips and tricks on how you can actually change the conversation from being adversarial to more customer-centric. And the starting point for this, the starting point for you to become actually, more customer focused despite all these pressures and the stresses that you experience, is to understand what is actually going on your customer side. So how does the buyer in this situation is actually acting? What kind of feeling, what kind of anxieties do they experience? So let me explain, because I've been there. I know exactly what they're now currently going through. For your buyers, it feels like a rude awakening. It feels like something that they've, a movie that they just watched yesterday in the end of the day. Probably you will all remember, this image that you now see on your screen. It went, viral probably back in the day. I think in 2021 it was, when that big container ship got stuck in the Suez Canal, and pretty much all of the global supply chains were disrupted just because of that single ship. I think that was really the moment where a lot of procurement and supply chain professionals, got a lot of scrutiny, got a lot of tough love from their managers and leadership teams to say, what is going on? Why do we have supply chains that can be disrupted by a single container ship being stuck in the Suez Canal? Even if our containers are not on the ship, why are our supply chains suffering? And back in the day, obviously, a few years back, there was a lot of pressure for procurement and supply chain professionals to improve, to change, to do things differently. And now the situation feels the same. We feel now that there's, again, a massive exogenous shock, a supply chain disruption, maybe more from the financial point of view than from a physical point of view, but it has reverberation around the world, and we don't like it one bit. And we're going to get, again, scrutinized quite heavily on why we are having these exposures to suppliers that import into the US potentially. So it's something that is very, very creates a lot of anxiety on your customer side, and in particular with your procurement colleagues on the customer side, because their KPIs are directly impacted by this event as well. Here's just an overview of 15 KPIs that your buyers are assessed against. We obviously don't have time here today to go through every nitty-gritty KPI that you see on your screen, but I just would like to highlight a few that are KPIs that are actually very, very important to your buyer and for them to comply with them, and they're unfortunately negatively impacted by what we see happening with this new tariff regime. And I'm talking about these three KPIs in particular. And these KPIs are very important because if I'm not complying with these KPIs, if I'm not delivering against these KPIs in the best way possible, I might be losing my job. Right? I'm personally sometimes held accountable in my organization for avoiding risk, managing risk in my supply chain. And obviously now with these new tariff regimes, there's financial risk being put in the supply chains that I should have anticipated, and that I should have managed proactively. In most cases, probably your buyers have not, though, right? So they're exposed to something, or exposed the company to something that they should have mitigated upfront. So it's a direct hit to their KPI. I, as the buyer, should also manage the spend in a way that is, predictable, manageable for my organization. I should pretty much commit to a certain amount of money that we're spending with certain suppliers, and this is now completely out of whack. You coming into my meeting telling me your prices go up by 20%. Well, I haven't committed that to the business. I haven't communicated this to the business. So this directly will hit my KPI, and I potentially will lose my job of it because I didn't manage spend well. And lastly, another KPI that is very, very important and very, very dear to your buying colleagues on the customer side is the forecasting KPI. I'm sometimes the only person left in the organization that is responsible to forecast what we're going to be paying for a certain ingredient or service moving forward. And this forecast is obviously completely distorted now with this volatility, uncertainty that we're experiencing, with new news coming out of different channels like every day. So that KPI is also impacted. So what I'm trying to relay here is your buyer is feeling a lot of anxieties. They're feeling being directly impacted by these tariff conversations that are currently going on, and maybe are feeling even more personally impacted than you on the supplier and sales side. Now, I would like to take this even a step further and would like you to understand a little more on how your customer, and in particular how your buyer on the customer side, is assessing the relationship with you, and especially how they assess the relationship with you during this new tariff regime that we finding ourselves in. I would like to start though first with the general concept, the general tool that your buyers are using to assess the relationship with you. So bear with me for a moment. I will just outline first the tool that your buyers are using to assess and categorize the relationship that they have currently with you. And then we'll take it back into the context of what we're currently experiencing with tariffs. So what your buyer will do, they will use a tool called the Kralik metrics that you might have already heard of. They will assess you and the relationship that they have with you as the supplier along two dimensions. Dimension number one, they will assess how complex it is, how much risk there is to have a commercial relationship with you as their supplier. So if there's, for instance, a lot of alternatives available to what you have to offer, I would probably, categorize you as a, low risk and, with low complexity with regards to supply. That's probably how I'm going to see the relationship that I have with you. If you are the only one that is able to produce the respective product, if you, carry certain IP, if you, again, there's only one production location around the world that can produce that product for me, probably I consider you as quite risky and the supply chain as relatively complex. So that's the first dimension that I, as the buyer, will rate you on. The second dimension that we rate our supplier relationships on is value. So how valuable are you as the supplier to me? And this could mean how much money do I spend with you? So to put it into a monetary, perspective, but it could also mean how valuable are you with regards to what my end consumer take note of, right? I mean, is the product and service that you provide me with really end consumer noticeable, yes or no? If you wouldn't supply me tomorrow, would my end consumer or the customers that I'm servicing, would they actually take note, yes or no? And based on these two dimensions, you would fall into the four following categories. So category number one, complexity is low. So that means I have a lot of alternatives to what you have to offer. Equally so, the value is low in terms of money or what the end consumer is saying about you. So that means probably you're a non-critical supplier to me. On the flip side, you are, offering more significant value to me. Maybe I have large contracts, millions and millions of dollars with you. But at the same time, I still have alternatives. I can switch relatively quickly from one supplier to the other. So I probably would categorize you as a competitive-based relationship that I'm managing with you. The third category that you could fall into is what we could call a strategic essential relationship. And here we distinguish between strategic and essential. So strategic is a relationship where I voluntarily have reached out to you and say, look, let's do business together because I love what you do. You're the only one that can do it. Okay, I take that. I have to accept that. But you know what? It's so valuable. And I think we would be working very well together. Let's engage in a strategic relationship. It's like a honeymoon phase, right? Now we distinguish here between strategic and essential. So essential is a little bit more like a forced marriage. Well, I have to work with you because you are the only one that can do it. Do I really like that I have to work with you? Probably not, but I still have to because it's a lot of value that you deliver to me. And then lastly, obviously a category that you don't want to be falling in and that your customer doesn't really want to have any suppliers in. Well, you're a risky bottleneck, right? So you don't deliver a lot of value to me. The end consumer doesn't really take note that you're there, but still I have to manage you because it's so complex. I need to hold your hand pretty much to assure quality or to make sure that the trucks arrive on time, whatever it might be, right? So these are the four categories roughly that your customer is putting yourself in. And your customer is managing the relationship with you according to which category you fall in. When we normally present this to sales professionals such as yourselves, we would ask you now, okay, where do you think you would be in this 2x2 matrix? Where would your customers put you in? And I can assure you, because we've done this many, many times, 80% of you would tell me, Jens, I'm clearly a strategic supplier to my customer. Look, I'm producing all these amazing products. I'm market leader in XYZ. I have so many different clients. I've spent so much money on R&D. I have 20 production locations around the world. I must be a strategic supplier to my customer. So let me break some statistics to you. 60 to 70% of your customer suppliers, on average, are actually non-critical suppliers to them. This is just a fact. So the odds are very much stacked against you that you are a strategic supplier. I know that it's human, nature, and I know this very well, that we all want to be loved, we all want to be strategic. But the reality is most of your customers see you probably more as a non-strategic supplier than a strategic supplier. This is something very important to notice and that you maybe want to keep in the back of your mind. If you don't realize where you're at in this 2x2 matrix, you might be managing that relationship with the customer in totally the wrong way, which will harm the relationship. Now, let's put this back because I would like to bring this back to the tariff question, obviously. So tariff, again, we go back to the product examples that I've shown you at the outset of the presentation. Let's go back to that red pen that I'm buying. Obviously, we can all agree, if I buy a pen, it's probably a non-critical product because I have a lot of different alternatives available to me. Yes, they're slightly different to the red pen, the blue pens, but I can still use them to write. So probably I have a lot of options available for me. If you come into my meeting and tell me, Jens, the price for the pen goes up by 18%, I probably say, okay, thank you, but no thank you. I quickly just change my supply from the red pen supplier to the blue pen supplier. So this is what normally would happen if you were to confront me with a price increase. But now we're in a completely different era here, because probably my competition, if I'm, let's say, a US customer, probably my competition, they look also for the blue pen suppliers. And maybe there's now a lot of competition for the blue pen suppliers. So me going to the other suppliers, it might not be that easy, might not be that readily implementable. And maybe these blue pen suppliers increase their prices now as well in anticipation of me creating more demand. So maybe the red pen that I thought was a non-critical supplier relationship to me moves now to become a risky bottleneck. And I don't like that. I don't like to have risky bottlenecks in my supply chain. So I need to manage this proactively, despite the fact that I normally don't even want to touch non-critical suppliers. Let's go into example number 2. Let's say you produce and you sell me some nice chemical that you put into these beautiful red bins. Or these barrels rather. And let's say I do have some options available as well. Probably what I've done is I allocated 30% business to you, and then I split the remainder of my volumes amongst these blue suppliers there. So I have an allocation that I can play with depending upon if, for instance, you increase prices unexpectedly, I can reallocate volumes to the other players. So this is normally on how I think and how I will manage that relationship with you. So I will just move some volume from you to others if I'm no longer happy with your performance on the price front, on the supply front, whatever it might be. But again, here I'm being faced with a situation similar to the pen example, that probably I cannot from one day to the other reallocate volume. Because these big volumes, because the value is quite high, I might not be able to reallocate quickly to change one supplier from the other. And again, my competition might be approaching these suppliers as well. So the optionality that I had, or I thought I had, is actually not there really. So again, a competitive-based relationship all of a sudden overnight moves into a risky bottleneck situation that I as the buyer has to manage. Lastly, let's say you're a strategic, essential supplier to me. We could argue, well, are you safe there? Probably not safe because, yes, you'd provide a lot of value to me. You're a strategic partner potentially to me. But again, with the cost structure now going up by 25%, maybe I can no longer, consider you as adding enough value to me that I can justify to keep you as a strategic supplier. Because again, we might be losing money with what you put in front of me with regards to cost increases here. So again, also the strategic relationships all of a sudden become a risky bottleneck to me. So the situation for your buyer really looks dire because all of a sudden, a lot of their suppliers that they thought they had a good plan to manage fall into a risky bottleneck situation that they need to proactively manage. And this obviously increases, their pressure, their stress level tenfold. So what I want to show you here really is this is what your customer and especially your buyer is going through and experiencing. So let's bring this also or relate this to the negotiation spectrum that we discussed early on, and let's look into where your buyers are with regards to the negotiation spectrum. Generally, in normal times, we could maybe argue that they're somewhere over here, right? The pen, maybe they're a bit more positional, with maybe a commodity, they're a bit more value focused, depending on how big the contracts are. And then maybe with regards to the strategic relationships, the microchips here, maybe they're a bit more collaborative. Now, all of a sudden, though, again, we are in a different world. All of a sudden, they are also being forced and incentivized pretty much by their management, by their leadership team, push back on any price increases. We cannot accept any price increases from our suppliers because we will go under as a business, right? So they're being instructed, let's say, similar to you, that they also should be acting and interacting with you in a very adversarial fashion. What that will show us that if you're acting adversarial, if they're acting adversarial, this will only end up in a lose-lose situation, where nobody will really, get out of this alive, pretty much, or get out of this as a winner. So if we now understood, where we are in terms of our approach as sales managers, now that we've understood where the buyer is and what they're experiencing, their feelings, their pressures that they're confronted with, let's look into how we can solve for this in the best way possible. It's not an easy solution. There is no silver bullet, ladies and gentlemen, but there is at least something that you can do to potentially move out, these, from the adversarial spectrum to more of a collaborative and customer-centric conversation with the buyer and the customer that you're interacting with. So we want to show you some tips and tricks that you can apply to, get out of the stressful situation, no longer fighting and flighting, but really think of, let's do this to really showcase to our customers that we actually want to be on their side, that we're playing, on their team and not just passing over the fence a 20% price increase. So in the spirit of Winston Churchill, let's leverage, the crisis. Let's never have a, good crisis go to waste. Let's leverage this crisis and showcase to a customer that we're not adversarial, but that we're customer-centric and trying to help them to get out of this tariff mess in the best way possible. So let me start with some tips on what you not or should not be doing. And I know probably some of you have already started to do that, but I can only encourage you not to. And here's some of the obvious that you might know is coming, but I just want to, make the obvious very clear as well. Do not just communicate a price increase. Do not just send an email saying, because of this new tariff, our costs go up by 20%. That's the reason why, customer, we need to increase our prices by 20% as well. This will not go down well. Let me tell you, I might not have an option to get rid of you as a supplier in the here and now. I might need to absorb the 20% that you put on the table. But believe me so, I will find the first opportunity where I can get rid of you, because this is not how I want or consider my suppliers to act. So refrain from that. As much as you might get pressured from your internal stakeholders to do so, you will ruin the relationship beyond repair. Another vehicle that I've seen many suppliers in similar situations, doing, or the card that they're trying to play, is to say, let's call for force majeure. Let me just explain real quick for people that are not so familiar with force majeure. It's a clause in your contract that you probably will be having with your customers where it says, if there's an act of God, if there's something unforeseeable on the buying side or on the supply side, we have the right pretty much to annulate the contract, pretty much to rip the contract apart and to renegotiate. Some people might be saying, hey, this is an act of God. But let me tell you, just from my perspective as a buyer, what I would argue immediately. I mean, last time I checked, Donald Trump is not God. So I don't think it's an act of God that we have these tariffs in place. And more on a serious note, obviously, these tariffs have been communicated probably for a good 12 months. I mean, he has been probably talking about it, but yeah, for a good 12 months, I would say, during his campaign. So it's not really something that has fallen out of the sky that hit us like an earthquake. So it's probably something that I could argue you should have anticipated. We probably could spend here another hour or so, bartering back and forth who's right or who's wrong, but this is not the point. The point that I'm trying to make, you don't even want to have this argument. You don't even want to entertain this conversation. You don't want to have a judge to decide, is the buying side right or are you as the supplier right? You don't even want to play this card because it will ruin the relationship beyond repair. So how to diffuse these tough sales conversations with your customers? What can you do and what should you do and what would I have loved to see from you in similar situations? First of all, I would really appreciate if you acknowledge my reality, the buyer's reality. I mean, we gave you a little understanding now where they're coming from, why they're feeling so pressured, why they're really being so, maybe positional, abrasive, tactical, because they all of a sudden have a supply base that is completely turned upside down. You're not the only supplier that they need to be dealing with. There's a lot of supplier relationships that they need to reinvestigate and need to address. They also, obviously, are personally impacted, as I said. My personal performance is being assessed against how I manage this current tariff scenario, and probably most of my scorecard is red. So I'm not really happy about it. I potentially lose my job because of it. And lastly, we want to make sure that you not only acknowledge my reality by just saying we understand, but also by showing some certain interventions, some certain actions that shows me that you've understood and are supporting me in the here and now. First of all, and again, it might sound super obvious, but for most suppliers, sometimes it's not. Well, you need to bring in your SWAT team right away. You must have had already conversations internally on what you're going to be doing with regards to this tariffs being implemented. So I would like to hear from you. I would like to see that SWAT team, this emergency team, this tactical team that is working day in, day out to make at least the tariff impact less severe, right? I mean, what are you doing with regards to creating efficiency? What stones are you turning to find efficiencies that you potentially could pass on to me? Right? I would like to see that you're working on it. I don't want to see already we're going to absorb all the costs. This is not realistic. Absolutely not. But I want you to see that you're working on it. I want you to see a clear plan that you have in place on what you're going to do on day one, on week one, month 3, month 6, month 12. And I'm not even exaggerating here. This is the level of detail that I would like to see from you. What are you going to do? The tariffs are now here. They're going to be implemented today or on Saturday, if I believe. So I want to know, what are you going to do on day one? Because I, as the buyer, if we're interacting in that interaction that you are the supplier and I'm the buyer, my manager will ask me exactly the same questions. And if I don't have an answer to that, they say, well, I don't know what my suppliers are doing. This is obviously not what I would consider as collaborative or customer-centric. This is what I would consider as passive behavior. So have a plan in place that I can use. Communicate proactively. And this is something super important. Obviously, there's a lot of complexities and internal stakeholders that I need to satisfy. So communicate with me and update me regularly on what is happening and what are you doing to be on my side in this situation. And also very important, this is not the moment to be shy. This is the moment to take the lead and be the leader and take me with you on what you're going to do to help us to get out of this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous situation. So you really need to step up your game. Don't be passive, but be proactive and show to your customer that you're on your side, that you acknowledge their reality. Now, I also would like to, and again, we're coming back to Winston Churchill here, I also want you to see this as an opportunity for you to create value, actually. Right? The first action steps that we just discussed was more around how do you acknowledge their reality? How do you make sure that they feel confident that you're on their side? Now that they've realized that you're on their side, they're open to listen to you, what you actually have to offer. What can we be doing differently? And I would like to come back to what I've shown you early on. There's a lot of KPIs that I also need to comply with, that are also being measured against as the buyer, that create a lot of value on the customer side, that I actually, feel good about. So today is the day, or now is the time really to look into all these areas of value that maybe previously we didn't discuss with you because you were just a non-critical supplier. Maybe previously we couldn't discuss because we didn't have the internal resources to even think of doing that project with you. But now I have all my business's attention. I will get every resource that we have available in our own organization to make certain value elements become a reality because we are in such a dire situation. But you need to come up, don't wait for me to tell you what to do. I want you to have a plan and to anticipate what are the value elements that are most important to me. So to illustrate this and to make it very tangible for you, even if you are now considered a risky bottleneck, now is your opportunity to showcase to me, you actually deserve to be a strategic supplier to me, a strategic relationship to me. Even if you've been before a competitive-based supplier, even if you've been before a non-critical supplier. So be customer-centric. What does it really mean? Well, you need to understand my value chain proactively. I mean, make sure that you understand what are my risks and opportunities. Where's the biggest value? Where are the low-hanging fruit that we should be tackling first to maybe increase sales by introducing a new product that you're offering, by qualifying maybe an additional production site of yours, to maybe buy more from you because it satisfies end consumer needs much better. Offer new ideas, and again, projects that we maybe have, previously not approached or discussed. All these projects in the past that, again, were maybe dismissed because I told you as the buyer, we don't have time, we don't have resources, I don't have management approval. Now is the time to table them again and say, look, this is something that can really help you, customer, because we know what your risk and opportunities are. We know your business needs. We're thinking and acting like you are. Let's, propose that again, because now is the moment where probably I will get the approval internally if it makes sense, if it makes me more successful and get out of this tariff situation more alive than dead. And again, take the lead here. Don't wait for your customer to have a conversation with you, right? They want to see you proactively, reaching out and saying, this is what we're going to do because we want to be your partner. We acknowledge your reality and we know also how to create value for you. We're coming close to the hour now. Obviously, I want to leave some time for question and answers, but I just want to leave you with my last thought, namely, please take some action after this webinar here today. And sometimes it's easier said than done. What I would advise you to do, and I know it might look simple, but I've seen so many suppliers that are struggling with exactly this. What your customer wants to see, what your buyer wants to see, is a clear action plan that articulates what is it that you're going to do, what outcome will you drive with this particular project, how will you achieve the what, by when will it be complete, and not as soon as possible or next year or in 2026. I want to have a specific date by when this is going to be complete and how you're going to offer me help or realize the outcome that we're after. Who will be responsible? I want to see specific names, and I want to have also insights on what the particular next steps are. Because this project plan, this action plan, is something that I would like to take one-on-one to my manager and tell them, this is what the supplier is going to do. They acknowledge our reality, they're helping us, and this is how they want to create value for us. And I want them to immediately understand where I'm coming from. If you have an action plan that you maybe show to your loved ones back home, your husband, wives, your mom, if they don't understand what you're talking about, your action plan is not explicit enough. And this is the type of granularity that you want to provide your buyer with, especially in these difficult situations. Again, I want to end this conversation or this webinar and this presentation with the two gentlemen that I kicked it off with. So on the left-hand side, again, Donald Trump. Tariffs, the most beautiful word in the world. I don't know if we've resolved that question. I'll let you be the judge. I would rather have you focus on what Winston Churchill said, namely, never let a good crisis go to waste. And boy, is that a good crisis. And I think you can definitely, play it to your advantage if you focus more on your customers. With that being said, thank you very much for your attention. Obviously, you're going to have a Q&A session now, but I want to just leave you with the thought of maybe if you enjoyed this, join some of our sales performance trainings, where we always try to activate the voice of your customer and presenting, with procurement professionals on what your buyers and customers really need from you. Would be great if you join us in one of these workshops as well to unleash your customer-centricity mindset. Okay, with that being said, let me hand it over to Ivan Stevanovic and with the questions that he has collected from you.
Thanks, Jens. So first question, we have received an email from the customer demanding 20% decrease in price, and there's a deadline attached to it. We need to respond in 5 days. What do you recommend us to do? How do we manage the situation?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I have to be open and honest with you. Probably in my procurement career, I've sent a bunch of these emails as well, in similar tough situations, or just as a tactic to say, okay, let's see what's happening. Let's see what sticks. Because sometimes it could easily be that I just want to put pressure on you as the supplier, as the sales manager. And maybe I know that my power leverage is quite high. I'll just, maybe I get a 3% discount by just sending one email, which took me 5 minutes. So this could be just a pure tactic, or it could be coming from those pressure, those emotions, the stress that I just tried to outline to you, right? The fear that I'm going to lose my job if I'm not doing something. So you obviously want to, contemplate on how you're going to react to this. You can always obviously, offer a discount, which I wouldn't advise you do. I would advise you to follow, along those lines that I just outlined to you. Namely, acknowledging their reality, offering, them an explanation how you're going to do, how you bring in your SWAT team to turn every stone to make sure that there is some efficiency that's going to come their way. At the same time, you want to leverage the situation to have a conversation around value and what value you can create. I think that email is a starting point of a conversation, but you want to sense check, is it coming just from a tactical perspective, or is there really something meaningful behind? And it's a conversation starter. I think no buyer expects that you will just say, yes, I reduce my price by 20%. I think this is not realistic.
Thanks, Jens. Next one, from your long experience as a professional buyer, what was the one that you would consider best strategy to resolve difficult situations that you had opportunity to experience by one of your suppliers?
Yeah, so I think if I understand the question correctly, so I think this more you want the supplier to understand or to make themselves a little vulnerable as well. What I really not appreciate from suppliers is when they don't acknowledge that something is not going well, that they've done something wrong, or they didn't perform well, or they don't anticipate that something is not going well. That always made me very, it made me upset, right? Because obviously I'm being responsible for the suppliers that I've selected as the buyer, right? So my management team, my business leadership team will come back to me and say, Jens, why did you select the supplier? Why did they not supply on time? Why did we have to stop the lines because of the supplier? Why are prices going up by X%? You promised us that prices will be stable in 2025. Now they're going up by 5%. Why are you not doing your job right, Jens, right? So the best suppliers that help me to address difficult situations such as this one is to be proactive and to say, hey, we and to acknowledge, hey, we have a problem here, right? And here's what I do. And not just sending, hey, we have a problem, 5% price increase, but we have a problem that we need to, work collaboratively, together with, and we have already an idea as supplier on what we're going to do about it. So this is something very, very important, that you want to be proactive, that you want to show to your customer that you acknowledge their reality. This is really an underlying theme of customer centricity. You want to acknowledge your counterparts' reality, their anxieties, their feeling, not just by brushing over them. You need to make sure that you're very specific about that before you then start in coming up with solutions. So again, suppliers that have been proactive and had an action plan in place that I could take readily back to my internal managers, these were the supplier relationships that I really, enjoyed the most and had the most, success with.
Awesome. Thanks, Jens. Here's another one. How would you overcome the customer approach where they simply say, send me the plan or bullet points on an email, rather opening the door to have a deeper and more constructive conversation?
Yeah, look, I mean, you cannot expect as a supplier to always have a face-to-face. I mean, look, let's take the example of Unilever. There are 40,000 suppliers. Do you really believe that Unilever as a customer can welcome, 40,000 suppliers on a daily basis to have a chat? Absolutely not. So sometimes it will be more transactional. Sometimes it is not what maybe you've been taught in sales high school. Let's have a conversation with somebody. Let's explore face-to-face. Let's read their emotions. Let's persuade them. Let's upsell, cross-sell them. It's not going to work when you have 40,000 suppliers. You will not sit down with them. You need to have succinct support. You need to have that project plan that is super to the point, similar to the action plan that I outlined to you. This is what I want to see. And if it's good, believe me, I will reach out to you and we'll have another conversation. If it's crap, I'm not going to come back to you, for sure not. But don't think like, oh, wow, but the customer doesn't give me a face-to-face meeting. That means they don't want to collaborate. Well, yeah, maybe they don't want to because you are a non-critical supplier to them and they really generally don't have the time. So don't take this, as a tactic by just send me something and then, I try to gain an advantage over you. It might be just because the resources are just not there to have this, what we all appreciate, this direct physical contact and face-to-face interaction with people. It might not always work, especially in these tough situations where, remember the Kralik metrics that we discussed, where most of my suppliers all of a sudden are risky bottlenecks, and I need to manage them proactively, despite the fact that I actually don't have the time, the resource to do so. I now have to. I need to find the time. So probably even, or especially during these difficult times, expect your buyers on the customer side not to be available as much as you want them to be.
Thanks, Jens. So let's build on this. I mean, how do you design something like that and get the customer to call you for the next step? I mean, so many different customers, buyers, preferences. From your experience, what would you recommend? How should that look like?
Yeah, it obviously depends really on case by case, on how you want to adjust it, fine tune it, how you want to communicate it. Depends on how long you've been, in that relationship with that customer. It depends on personal relationships as well. But generally, it's all down to how well is your action plan. I've seen many action plans where it says, well, we want to help you create efficiencies. Okay, this is pretty much what they say, what the project is, but what does it really mean? Will we, work on efficiencies that reduce, costs by 10%? How will we do it? By when it's complete, who will be actually doing the work, and what are the next steps? So I feel where most of the communication falls short of is that there's generally good ideas from the supply side, but they're not formulated in a way that are really, let's say, put into a framework that I can readily understand as the customer and as the buyer, and that I can readily discuss with my internal stakeholders. So it really boils down to how prepared you are, how aligned you are internally, how much resource you can commit to do things differently, to really, articulate to your buyer in this case on what you will do specifically and by when it will be complete. Just having a conversation which is very top line is probably not very advisable, especially in these situations where stress levels are high and emotions are high as well.
Great.
Ivan, maybe we have
Jens.
time for a last question here before we have to wrap it up, since we come to close to the hour.
Yeah, this one's, I don't know how complex will it be to answer, but since it's related to the KPIs, buyers KPIs that you shared. So knowing that there are also other relevant stakeholders on the customer side that might have different KPIs. So in your experience, what are the relations? What's the story behind, the relation between the buyer's KPIs and the other stakeholders' KPIs?
Yeah, this is a wide topic for sure. I mean, first of all, I want you just to acknowledge this as well, guys, that there is more than just 2 or 3 KPIs that the buyer is being, assessed against. There's much more that you can consider, and much more, meaningful conversation that you can have with them to excite them about something because it's on their scorecard. So I think this is probably the first thing. Also, and then to make it a little more complex, and to the question that we had there was, there's obviously stakeholders in the background that I, as the buyer, report into, have a relationship with. I need to, make them happy, satisfy them. I need to work with them, and they have probably certain KPIs as well, which might be in line with my KPIs, which might be in conflict with my KPIs. In generally and in principle, everything should be aligned with your customer's business need. So that's where it all starts off from, right? But the reality is that there might be, disconnects between what the buyer is really assessed against and maybe what other stakeholders are assessed against. So to make a long story short, you probably need to anticipate to a certain degree who is maybe this buyer committee. Who do they consist of? Yes, the buyer, the procurement person might be the front person that I'm interacting with, but there might be an R&D person, a finance person, and an HR person, a product development person also in the background that buyer needs to convince and collaborate with to make my solution work, or to convince them to absorb the price increase, or whatever it might be. So we want to then also make sure that we equip that person that we're interacting with, the procurement person that in that case, with some arguments, some ammunition pretty much, to also allow them to convince their internal stakeholders that what we are offering is actually a good project to be pursued. Right? So you need to think a little bit more holistically The buyer KPIs are important. You need to make the link with the business needs, but at the same time, you need to also understand who is the buyer reporting to, who are they collaborating with, what are these people's motivators, what are their KPIs, are they in conflict or are they aligned with the buyer, and how can we equip the buyer that we're interacting with to communicate well with these internal stakeholders to convince them to select and partner with us as their supplier. It's a more complicated question that probably we don't have enough time for. Anyways, Ivan, thanks for consolidating all these questions here, and thank you everybody for submitting those questions to us, and obviously thank you very much for being such a great audience for us here today. Hopefully you enjoyed our little webinar, and hopefully we're going to see each other soon, either in another webinar or in one of our workshops. Thank you everybody, and have a good day.